Welcome to Boring Nightmares, where we explore the most unbelievable missing persons cases that have baffled investigators and left families searching for answers. If you're new here, please hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our latest investigations into these mysterious disappearances. Now let's dive into today's incredible case. They were five young friends, inseparable since high school, bonded by late night study sessions, football games, and the kind of trust that only comes from growing up together in a small town. On the night of June 14th, 1986, they drove to Cleveland for what should have been the concert of their lives. The Stone Ponies were headlining at the Agora Ballroom, and for weeks, the group had talked about nothing else. They were college bound, full of dreams, with their whole futures ahead of them. But somewhere between the last encore and the drive home, something went terribly wrong. By dawn, all five had vanished without a trace. The missing friends were as different as they were close. There was David Morrison, the natural leader of the group, a star quarterback with a full scholarship to Ohio State waiting for him in the fall. His younger brother Mark often joked that David could talk his way out of anything, a charm that made him popular with everyone from teachers to teammates. Sarah Chin was the academic powerhouse, valedictorian bound with acceptance letters from 3 Ivy League schools. Despite her serious demeanor in class, those who knew her well saw the mischievous spark behind her wire-rimmed glasses. Then there was Tommy Rodriguez, the artist of the group, always carrying a sketchbook and dreaming of attending art school in New York. His portfolio was already impressive enough to catch the attention of several prestigious programs. Jennifer Walsh was the free spirit, the one who convinced the others to take spontaneous road trips and stay up all night talking about life's mysteries. Her infectious laugh could lift anyone's mood, even during their most stressful senior year moments. Finally, there was Mike Chen, Sarah's older brother, who had graduated the year before but remained close to the group. He worked at his family's restaurant but dreamed of becoming a music producer, which made him the natural choice to organize their concert expedition. The group had meticulously planned their trip to Cleveland. Mike had borrowed his father's blue 1984 Chevrolet Malibu for the 2-hour drive from their hometown of Millfield, Ohio. They pooled their money for gas and tickets, and Sarah had even created a detailed itinerary that included dinner at a diner near the venue and the exact route home. Their parents knew where they were going and when to expect them back. Everything seemed perfectly normal. The Stone Ponies concert at the Agora Ballroom was everything they had hoped for. Multiple witnesses later confirmed seeing the group at the venue, laughing and singing along to their favorite songs. The concert ended around 11:30 p.m., and security cameras caught them leaving the ballroom at approximately 11:45 p.m. Mike was seen unlocking the Malibu in the parking lot, and all five friends were captured getting into the car. The timestamp on the security footage read 11:52 p.m. It would be the last confirmed sighting of any of them. When the five friends failed to return home by their promised time of 3 a.m., their families initially weren't concerned. Young people often lost track of time, especially after an exciting concert. But when Sunday morning arrived with no word from any of them, panic began to set in. Sarah's mother called Jennifer's house, only to learn that the Walsh family was equally worried. By Sunday afternoon, all five families had contacted the Millfield Police Department. The initial police response was frustratingly slow. Because the friends were all 18 or older, and because they had left town voluntarily, law enforcement treated it as a low-priority case. The prevailing assumption was that the group had simply decided to extend their night out, perhaps driving to another city or staying with friends they had met at the concert. This dismissive attitude would later become a source of bitter resentment for the families involved. By Monday morning, when none of the five had shown up for their summer jobs or contacted their families, the police finally began to take the disappearance seriously. They reached out to Cleveland authorities and asked them to check the area around the Agora Ballroom. What they discovered would turn a missing persons case into something far more sinister. The blue Chevrolet Malibu was found on Tuesday, June 17th, in a remote area approximately 40 miles southeast of Cleveland, near the small town of Newcomerstown. The car was parked on a dirt road that led to an abandoned strip mine, far from any logical route back to Millfield. Most disturbing of all, the doors were unlocked, the keys were still in the ignition, and there were clear signs that the vehicle had been there for days. Inside the car, investigators found the friends' concert tickets, Sarah's carefully planned itinerary, and several personal items, including Jennifer's purse and Tommy's sketchbook. But there were also things that didn't belong. Muddy footprints on the floor mats that didn't match any of the missing friends' shoes, and strange scratches on the dashboard that appeared fresh. Most puzzling of all, the car's gas tank was nearly full, even though the friends should have used most of their fuel driving to Cleveland and back. The discovery of the abandoned car launched an intensive search operation. Dozens of volunteers joined police and search dogs in combing the dense woods surrounding the strip mine. The terrain was challenging, filled with deep ravines, thick underbrush, and the dangerous remnants of old mining operations. Despite searching for over a week, no trace of the five friends was found. As days turned into weeks, the case grew stranger. Anonymous tips began pouring in, each more bizarre than the last. Someone claimed to have seen the five friends at a truck stop in Pennsylvania. Another caller insisted they had spotted the group at a commune in West Virginia. Most unsettling of all was a series of phone calls to the police station, always from payphones, always featuring heavy breathing and the sound of someone crying in the background before the line went dead. The families refused to give up hope. David's father organized search parties that continued long after the official investigation had stalled. Sarah's mother distributed missing persons flyers across 3 states. Mike's parents hired a private investigator who uncovered some troubling information about the area where the car was found. The abandoned strip mine had a dark history, with rumors of illegal activities and at least 2 other disappearances in the past decade that had never been solved. Summer turned to fall, and the case grew cold. The 5 friends missed their high school graduation ceremony, where their empty seats served as a haunting reminder of the mystery that had consumed their small town. David's football scholarship was withdrawn when he failed to report to Ohio State. Sarah's acceptance to Harvard became meaningless. Tommy's art portfolio gathered dust in his bedroom, while Jennifer's laughter was reduced to memories, and Mike's dreams of music production faded into silence. The first break in the case came exactly 4 months after the disappearance. On October 14, 1986, Two brothers were fishing along the Tuscarawas River, about 15 miles downstream from where the car had been found. The autumn rains had been heavy that year, and the river was running higher than usual. As they worked their way along the muddy bank, the younger brother spotted something unusual caught in the roots of a partially submerged tree. At first glance, it appeared to be just another piece of debris washed down by the current. But as they looked closer, the brothers realized they were looking at a human skull, bleached white by months of exposure to the elements. 22 caliber bullet. The discovery of the skull sent shockwaves through both the investigation and the community. Finally, after months of uncertainty, there was physical evidence that something violent had happened to at least one of the missing friends. The skull was carefully extracted from the river and sent to the state crime lab for analysis. Initial examination revealed that the skull belonged to a young male, approximately 18 to 20 years old. The bullet fragment suggested death by gunshot, and the condition of the bone indicated that it had been in the water for several months. But perhaps most chilling of all was what forensic experts found carved into the back of the skull, a crude symbol that appeared to have been etched with a knife, consisting of 3 intersecting lines forming a triangle with a circle in the center. The symbol didn't match anything in law enforcement databases. Experts in the occult were consulted, but they too were baffled by the marking. It seemed to be something unique, possibly a signature left by whoever was responsible for the death. The discovery raised horrifying questions about what had happened to the other 4 friends. Dental records eventually confirmed what the families had feared. The skull belonged to David Morrison, the charismatic quarterback who had been looking forward to playing college football. The confirmation brought a mixture of grief and terrible certainty to his family. At least they knew David's fate, but the knowledge came with the horrifying realization that their son had been murdered. The discovery of David's remains intensified the search for the other 4 friends. If David had been killed, what had happened to Sarah, Tommy, Jennifer, and Mike? The investigation took on new urgency, with additional resources allocated to searching the river and surrounding areas. But weeks of intensive searching yielded nothing more. As winter approached, the case seemed to reach another dead end. The families were left with more questions than answers. Why had David been killed? Where were the others? Who was responsible for the mysterious symbol carved into his skull? And perhaps most disturbing of all, was there a chance that the other 4 friends were still alive somewhere, held captive by whoever had murdered David? The investigation had revealed a web of unanswered questions that would haunt the small town of Millfield for years to come. The discovery in the riverbed was just the beginning of a mystery that would prove far more complex and disturbing than anyone could have imagined. What had started as a simple trip to see their favorite band had become something much darker, something that suggested the 5 friends had encountered evil in a form that their small-town innocence could never have prepared them for. The symbol carved into David Morrison's skull would become the signature clue that investigators hoped would eventually lead them to the truth. But as the investigation continued, it became clear that whoever was responsible for this crime had planned carefully, leaving behind just enough evidence to torment the families and authorities, but not enough to bring them to justice. The investigation into David Morrison's death revealed disturbing new questions that went far beyond a simple murder. The symbol carved into his skull became the focal point of a complex puzzle that investigators struggled to decode. Though several suspects had been investigated in similar cold cases, mysterious symbols and cryptic messages often remained the most challenging clues to interpret. Detective Ray Martinez, who had taken over as lead investigator following the discovery of David's remains, assembled a team of experts to analyze the strange marking. The symbol consisted of three intersecting lines forming a triangle with a circle in the center, etched with what appeared to be a sharp knife blade. Unlike typical gang markings or random vandalism, this carving showed deliberate precision, suggesting the perpetrator had taken considerable time to create it. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a forensic anthropologist from the State University, examined the skull under high-powered magnification. Her findings were unsettling. The symbol had been carved post-mortem, meaning David had already been dead when someone took the time to etch this marking into his bone. This suggested a level of ritualistic behavior that elevated the crime from a simple murder to something far more disturbing. The investigation team reached out to symbology experts, religious scholars, and even consultants specializing in occult practices. None could identify the marking from any known system of symbols. Dr. Marcus Webb, a professor of comparative religion, spent weeks researching the design, but concluded it appeared to be unique, possibly created specifically for this crime. Meanwhile, the search for the other four missing friends continued with renewed intensity. If David had been murdered and marked with this symbol, what fate had befallen Sarah, Tommy, Jennifer, and Mike? The discovery along the riverbank had proven that at least one of the friends had met with violence, but it raised the terrifying possibility that the others might have suffered similar fates. Local law enforcement expanded their search area, focusing on other waterways and remote locations where additional remains might be found. The media attention surrounding the case intensified, with reporters from across the state descending on Millfield to cover the story. The small town, once known primarily for its annual harvest festival and high school football team, suddenly found itself at the center of a murder investigation that seemed to grow more complex by the day. The families of the missing friends were caught between hope and despair. David's family could finally lay their son to rest, but the mysterious circumstances of his death brought little comfort. For the other families, the discovery only deepened their anguish. If David was dead, what hope remained for their children? Sarah's mother, Linda Chen, began receiving strange phone calls in the weeks following the discovery of David's skull. The caller never spoke, but she could hear what sounded like wind rustling through trees, and occasionally what might have been distant voices. The calls always came late at night and lasted only a few seconds before the line went dead. When she reported this to police, they traced the calls to various payphones scattered across a 3-county area, none of which yielded any useful evidence. Tommy's father, Roberto Rodriguez, became obsessed with the symbol carved into David's skull. He spent hours at the public library, researching ancient symbols and occult markings, convinced that understanding the meaning would lead to answers about his son's disappearance. His wife grew worried as Roberto's research consumed more and more of his time, filling notebooks with drawings and theories that seemed to lead nowhere. The investigation took an unexpected turn when a farmer named Earl Whitman contacted police about something unusual he had discovered on his property. Whitman owned land about 12 miles from where David's skull had been found, and while checking his fences after a storm, he had come across what appeared to be a deliberately arranged circle of stones in a remote corner of his pasture. Detective Martinez and his team investigated the stone circle, which measured approximately 8 feet in diameter. The stones appeared to have been placed with intention rather than occurring naturally, and soil samples from the center of the circle showed traces of what might have been a fire, though any ash or debris had long since been scattered by wind and rain. More disturbing was what they found buried 6 inches beneath the center of the circle. Wrapped in a piece of plastic was a small notebook, its pages water damaged but still partially legible. The notebook appeared to contain entries written in different handwriting styles, suggesting multiple authors. Most of the writing was illegible due to water damage, but investigators could make out fragments of what appeared to be dates, initials, and strange symbols that bore resemblance to the marking found on David's skull. The notebook was sent to the state crime laboratory for analysis, where document experts worked to enhance the faded writing using specialized techniques. What they discovered sent chills through the investigation team. Several pages contained what appeared to be lists of names, some of which matched the missing friends. David Morrison's initials appeared multiple times, as did what might have been Sarah Chen's and Mike Chen's names, though the damage made positive identification difficult. Perhaps most unsettling were entries that seemed to describe events or rituals, written in a cryptic style that suggested multiple participants. One partially legible passage read, "The circle calls for 5, but only 1 answers." Dr. Patricia Holmes, a criminal psychologist brought in to analyze the notebook's contents, believed they were looking at evidence of some kind of cult or ritualistic group activity. The language suggested a belief system centered around sacrifice and initiation, possibly involving the missing friends as unwilling participants. The timing references in the notebook seemed to correspond roughly with the period when the 5 friends had disappeared. The investigation now expanded to include a search for any connection between the missing friends and potential cult activity in the area. Detectives interviewed teachers, classmates, and community members, looking for any indication that the group might have been targeted by or involved with individuals practicing occult rituals. What emerged was a disturbing pattern of reports about unusual activity in the remote areas around Millfield during the mid-1980s. Several farmers mentioned finding dead animals arranged in strange patterns on their land. A local minister reported that someone had been stealing candles and religious items from his church. A group of hunters claimed they had encountered people dressed in robes conducting some kind of ceremony in the woods, though they had dismissed it at the time as teenagers playing pranks. Most significantly, investigators discovered that in the months leading up to the friend's disappearance, there had been reports of strangers asking questions about local young people, particularly those involved in school activities or sports. David Morrison's prominence as a quarterback and Sarah Chen's status as valedictorian might have made them visible targets for someone seeking specific types of victims. The case began to take on an even darker dimension when detectives learned about similar disappearances in neighboring counties during the same time period. Over the past decade, at least 6 other young people had vanished under mysterious circumstances, all of them high achievers or popular students. None of these cases had been solved, and in several instances, the missing persons had simply vanished without any trace being found. Detective Martinez contacted law enforcement agencies in the surrounding area to compare cases and evidence. What he discovered suggested the possibility of a serial killer or organized group that had been operating across a wider geographic area than initially suspected. The symbol carved into David Morrison's skull might be a signature that connected multiple crimes spanning several years. As winter approached and the first anniversary of the friend's disappearance drew near, the investigation had uncovered far more questions than answers. The discovery of David's remains had confirmed that at least one of the friends had been murdered, but it had also revealed evidence of what appeared to be ritualistic or cult-related activity that suggested a far more complex and sinister truth than anyone had imagined. The symbol carved into David's skull had become more than just evidence. It was a message, a signature, and a taunt from someone who wanted their work to be recognized. Whether the other 4 friends had met similar fates, or if they were still alive somewhere, held captive by whoever was responsible for David's death, remained a terrifying unknown that haunted everyone connected to the case. The small town of Millfield found itself forever changed by the revelation that something evil had moved among them, selecting their children as victims for purposes that remained as mysterious and frightening as the symbol that marked David Morrison's final resting place. The investigation team had exhausted every conventional avenue of inquiry. David Morrison's skull, with its cryptic symbol, seemed to mock their efforts with its silent testimony. But Detective Martinez refused to surrender to the growing sense that they were chasing shadows. As autumn deepened into winter, a new lead emerged from an unexpected source. Dr. Patricia Holmes, the criminal psychologist who had analyzed the mysterious notebook found at the Stone Circle, contacted Martinez with a disturbing connection she had uncovered. While researching similar cases across the Midwest, she had discovered a pattern that extended far beyond their small Ohio town. Between 1984 and 1988, at least 12 young people had vanished under circumstances that bore striking similarities to the case of the 5 friends. The pattern was subtle, but undeniable. In each case, the missing persons were high-achieving students or popular young adults who had disappeared during seemingly routine activities. More troubling still, in 3 of these cases, human remains had been discovered months or years later, bearing unusual markings that investigators had initially dismissed as post-mortem damage from exposure or animal activity. Dr. Holmes had obtained copies of the forensic reports through academic channels, and what she found sent chills through the investigation team. A skull discovered near Columbus in 1985 bore scratches that, when examined under magnification, appeared to be deliberate markings rather than random damage. A femur bone found in Pennsylvania in 1987 showed similar intentional scoring. Most significantly, partial remains discovered in Indiana in 1988 included a skull fragment with a symbol carved into the temporal bone that bore unmistakable similarities to the marking found on David Morrison. The symbol wasn't identical, but the methodology was consistent. Three intersecting lines forming a rough triangular pattern with additional marks that suggested a systematic approach to the carving. It appeared that whoever was responsible for David's death had been practicing this ritualistic marking for years, possibly decades. Detective Martinez immediately contacted law enforcement agencies in the affected jurisdictions. What he learned painted a picture of a coordinated operation that spanned multiple states and had been operating with impunity for years. The cases had never been connected because they occurred in different jurisdictions, involved different victim types, and were separated by enough time and distance to avoid detection. But there were other connections that became apparent once investigators began sharing information. Several of the disappearances had occurred near locations where reports of unusual cult activity had been filed. Strange fires in remote wooded areas, reports of robed figures conducting ceremonies, and discoveries of animal remains arranged in ritualistic patterns all clustered around the times and locations of the missing persons cases. Most disturbing of all was the testimony of a man named Robert Kellerman, a former member of what he described as a spiritual group that had operated in rural areas of Ohio, Pennsylvania, and Indiana during the 1980s. Kellerman had contacted authorities after learning about the discovery of David Morrison's remains, claiming that he had information about the symbol and the group responsible for the deaths. According to Kellerman, he had been recruited into the group in 1982 while struggling with addiction and homelessness. The group, which called itself the Circle of the Eternal Dawn, presented itself as a spiritual community dedicated to achieving transcendence through ritual and sacrifice. What began as seemingly harmless meditation and group ceremonies gradually escalated into increasingly dark practices. Members were required to surrender their worldly possessions and cut ties with family and friends as they progressed through levels of initiation. The group operated from several compounds hidden in remote forested areas, moving frequently to avoid detection by authorities. The symbol carved into David Morrison's skull was, according to Kellerman, a mark of completion used to designate successful sacrificial offerings. Different variations of the symbol indicated different types of rituals and levels of spiritual achievement for the group members who performed them. The fact that David's skull bore the symbol meant that his death had been planned and executed as part of a formal ceremony. Kellerman explained that the group believed human sacrifice was necessary to achieve spiritual enlightenment and communication with otherworldly entities. Young people were specifically targeted because their life force was considered more potent and their deaths more pleasing to the entities the group worshipped. The victims were often selected months in advance and observed until the appropriate time for their capture and sacrifice. The former cult member provided investigators with detailed descriptions of the group's compounds, its operational methods, and the identities of several key figures. Most importantly, he revealed that the group was still active and had likely continued its practices into the present day. The Circle of the Eternal Dawn had simply become more sophisticated in its selection of victims and disposal of evidence. Detective Martinez organized a multi-jurisdictional task force to investigate Kellerman's claims and coordinate efforts to locate the cult's current operations. The task force included FBI agents specializing in cult-related crimes, forensic anthropologists, and local law enforcement officers from across the affected region. The investigation revealed that the Circle of the Eternal Dawn had operated with remarkable sophistication, using legitimate business fronts, false identities, and carefully orchestrated public personas to avoid scrutiny. Several members had infiltrated local community organizations, schools, and even law enforcement agencies to gather intelligence on potential victims and monitor investigation efforts. The group's targeting of the 5 friends appeared to have been the result of months of surveillance and planning. David Morrison's prominence as a quarterback and Sarah Chen's status as valedictorian had made them visible targets for a group that specifically sought high-achieving young people for their rituals. The concert trip had provided the perfect opportunity for abduction, taking place far from the victim's home territory and during a time when their absence wouldn't be immediately noticed. Task Force investigators discovered that the group had established what they called collection points along major highways and near popular entertainment venues. These were locations where victims could be intercepted and transported to remote compounds without attracting attention. The area near the Agora Ballroom in Cleveland had been identified as one such collection point, with group members positioned to identify and target suitable victims. The investigation also revealed the horrifying scope of the Circle of the Eternal Dawn's activities. Over the course of nearly 2 decades, the group was believed to be responsible for the deaths of at least 47 young people across multiple states. The victims had been carefully selected, methodically hunted, and ritualistically murdered as part of an ongoing series of ceremonies designed to grant the group's leaders supernatural powers and eternal life. Dr. Elena Vasquez, the forensic anthropologist who had originally examined David Morrison's skull, was brought in to re-examine evidence from the other connected cases. Her analysis confirmed that the symbols found on various remains all showed consistent characteristics that suggested they had been created by the same person or someone trained in the same techniques. The precision and uniformity of the markings indicated that the group had developed a standardized method for creating these post-mortem signatures. The notebook found at the Stone Circle near Earl Whitman's farm was revealed to be a record of the group's activities, written in a cipher that used common English words to represent ritual concepts and victim information. When decoded by FBI cryptographers, the notebook contained detailed records of 17 separate ceremonies conducted between 1984 and 1986, including references to the 5 friends from Millfield. One particularly chilling entry, dated July 1986, read, "The chosen 5 have been delivered to the sacred grove. The quarterback's essence burns bright with leadership. The scholar girl's mind holds secrets of the ancient ways. The brother's loyalty will bind them in death, as it did in life. The artist sees visions that must be silenced. The dreamer's spirit calls to the void." The investigation had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into multiple states and had operated undetected for decades. The Circle of the Eternal Dawn represented one of the most sophisticated and deadly cult organizations in American criminal history, responsible for a reign of terror that had claimed dozens of young lives while masquerading as a spiritual movement. But perhaps most disturbing of all was the realization that the group was still active. Recent disappearances in neighboring states showed patterns consistent with the circle's methodology, suggesting that despite the exposure of their past activities, the organization had continued to evolve and adapt its practices to avoid detection. The families of the 5 friends, who had spent months in agonizing uncertainty about their children's fate, now faced the horrible truth that their loved ones had been targeted, hunted, and murdered by individuals who viewed their deaths as stepping stones to spiritual advancement. The discovery brought a measure of closure, but it came wrapped in a nightmare that extended far beyond their small town's tragedy. Detective Martinez knew that finding David Morrison's remains was only the beginning. Somewhere out there, the remaining members of the Circle of the Eternal Dawn were still practicing their deadly rituals, still targeting innocent young people, and still marking their victims with symbols that served as signatures of an evil that refused to die. The investigation had revealed the scope of the horror, but the work of bringing the perpetrators to justice was far from over. The symbol carved into David Morrison's skull had become more than evidence in a murder case. It was a declaration of war from an organization that viewed human life as nothing more than fuel for their twisted spiritual ambitions. The revelation that the Circle of the Eternal Dawn was still actively operating sent shockwaves through the task force. Detective Martinez knew that solving the mystery of David Morrison's death was only the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous investigation. The discovery of the organization's sophisticated structure and decades-long killing spree demanded a comprehensive response that would push law enforcement capabilities to their absolute limits. The investigation required a collaborative effort among federal, state, and local law enforcement agencies, forming a specialized task force designed to target this particular criminal activity across multiple geographical areas. The FBI brought in agents specializing in cult-related crimes and organized criminal enterprises, while state police contributed their expertise in multi-jurisdictional investigations and evidence coordination. Dr. Patricia Holmes worked closely with the task force to develop psychological profiles of both the organization's leadership and its recruitment patterns. The Circle of the Eternal Dawn exhibited the characteristics of a destructive cult with highly charged devotion to a charismatic leader, operating unethically through coercion and mind control, with only the leader and a few advisors cognizant of the full range of the group's activities. This vertical organization made infiltration and investigation particularly challenging. The task force's first breakthrough came when they successfully tracked down additional former members who had escaped the organization over the years. Like Robert Kellerman, these individuals had remained silent out of fear for their lives, but the renewed investigation gave them hope that the Circle could finally be brought to justice. Each testimony added another piece to the horrifying puzzle of the organization's operations. Sarah Chen's mother received renewed attention from investigators when they discovered that several other families of missing persons had reported similar anonymous phone calls over the years. The calls appeared to be part of a psychological manipulation tactic, as occult symbols and rituals played a crucial role in the organization's ceremonies, with these practices still popular among various modern occult societies. The Circle used these calls to maintain psychological control over the families of their victims, ensuring that the trauma extended far beyond the immediate disappearances. The investigation team established a comprehensive database of every missing person case that might be connected to the circle's activities. Using advanced computer modeling and geographic analysis, they identified patterns in the disappearances that suggested the organization operated in clearly defined territories, with different cells responsible for specific regions. This discovery indicated that the circle was far more organized and widespread than anyone had initially suspected. Forensic accountants were brought in to trace the financial networks that supported the circle's operations. What they uncovered was a sophisticated money laundering scheme that used legitimate businesses, religious tax exemptions, and international banking to fund the organization's activities. Several seemingly respectable companies across multiple states were revealed to be fronts for the circle, providing both financial resources and cover for their recruitment efforts. Investigators used the cult's own materials, including pamphlets, books, and audio recordings, to determine the organization's structure and philosophy, while also obtaining financial information from tax records and property databases. The circle had maintained extensive documentation of their rituals and beliefs, viewing their criminal activities as sacred ceremonies worthy of detailed record keeping. The psychological evaluation of captured members revealed the extent of the organization's mind control techniques. Dr. Holmes discovered that the circle employed sophisticated brainwashing methods that combined sleep deprivation, nutritional manipulation, isolation, and repetitive indoctrination to break down new recruits' resistance. Many members genuinely believed they were participating in a holy mission to achieve transcendence through sacrifice. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement agencies in neighboring states began reporting unusual activity that matched the circle's known operational patterns. Anonymous tips increased dramatically as news of the investigation spread, with many callers reporting suspicious gatherings, abandoned buildings being used for nighttime activities, and individuals who had disappeared under circumstances similar to the 5 friends from Millfield. The task force faced unprecedented challenges in their pursuit of the organization. Cult-related investigations were among the most difficult cases confronting police departments, complicated by confusion about cult activities and the absence of specific laws aimed at curbing such organizations. The circle operated in a legal gray area, using religious freedom protections to shield many of their activities from scrutiny while carefully avoiding direct criminal behavior until the final, fatal stages of their rituals. Detective Martinez worked with federal prosecutors to develop strategies for charging circle members under RICO statutes, treating the organization as a criminal enterprise rather than a religious group. This approach would allow them to prosecute members for conspiracy and racketeering, even if individual criminal acts couldn't be directly proven. The strategy represented a new approach to combating cult-related violence. The investigation also revealed that the circle had infiltrated various community organizations, law enforcement agencies, and even government offices. Several members held positions of authority that allowed them to monitor investigation efforts and protect the organization from exposure. This discovery explained why so many previous investigations into connected disappearances had failed to uncover the broader conspiracy. Particularly disturbing was the revelation that the circle had developed relationships with corrupt officials who provided advance warning of law enforcement activities. The organization's longevity and success in avoiding detection were not simply due to their remote locations and careful planning, but also to active protection from individuals within the system designed to stop them. The task force implemented unprecedented security measures to prevent information leaks that might compromise their investigation. Communication was limited to encrypted channels. Investigation materials were stored in secure facilities, and even team members' families were provided protection due to the very real threat of retaliation from the circle. As winter deepened into spring, the investigation began to yield concrete results. Several safe houses were raided, yielding evidence of recent ritual activity and confirming that the circle remained active. Weapons caches were discovered that suggested the organization was prepared to defend itself violently if cornered. Most importantly, investigators began to develop actionable intelligence about the location of the circle's primary compounds. The discovery of David Morrison's skull and the subsequent investigation had evolved into one of the largest domestic terrorism investigations in federal law enforcement history. What had begun as a local missing persons case now involved hundreds of investigators across multiple states pursuing an organization that had operated with impunity for decades while claiming dozens of innocent lives. Dr. Elena Vasquez, working with forensic teams from across the country, had identified potential circle victims dating back to the early 1970s. The scope of the organization's crimes suggested that they might be responsible for hundreds of deaths over their operational history. Each new discovery added urgency to the investigation and determination to finally bring the perpetrators to justice. The symbol carved into David Morrison's skull had become the key piece of evidence linking cases across multiple jurisdictions and decades. Forensic analysis revealed that the same tools and techniques had been used to create markings on victims found as far away as Texas and Montana, proving the nationwide scope of the circle's activities. As the first anniversary of the discovery of David's remains approached, Detective Martinez reflected on how far the investigation had come. What had started as a search for answers about 5 missing friends had uncovered a conspiracy that reached into the heart of American society. The Circle of the Eternal Dawn represented a unique threat, combining the fanaticism of a religious cult with the operational sophistication of organized crime. The families of the 5 friends, who had endured years of uncertainty followed by the horror of learning their children's fate, now faced the additional burden of knowing that their tragedy was part of a much larger pattern of violence. But they also found some measure of hope in the knowledge that their loss might finally lead to justice for dozens of other families who had suffered similar fates. The investigation continued with renewed intensity as federal resources poured into the effort to locate and neutralize the remaining circle operations. Electronic surveillance, undercover operations, and forensic analysis were all brought to bear on an organization that had managed to hide in plain sight for decades while pursuing their deadly agenda. The symbol that had marked David Morrison's death was no longer just evidence of a single crime, but a declaration of war between law enforcement and an organization that viewed murder as a sacrament. The battle to stop the Circle of the Eternal Dawn would test the limits of investigative capabilities and challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of evil in modern society. As Detective Martinez prepared for what he knew would be the most dangerous phase of the investigation, he understood that success would require not just excellent police work, but also the courage to confront an enemy that had spent decades perfecting the art of murder while hiding behind the protection of religious freedom. As the final pieces of the investigation fell into place, Detective Martinez prepared for what everyone knew would be the most dangerous phase of the pursuit. The Circle of the Eternal Dawn had been operating in shadows for decades, but now their carefully constructed facade was crumbling. Multiple federal agencies coordinated unprecedented resources to locate and neutralize what had become one of the largest domestic terrorism investigations in American history. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A former member named Patricia Williams contacted authorities after seeing news coverage of the investigation. Williams had escaped the Circle in 1987, but fear had kept her silent for over 3 decades. Now, with the scope of the organization's crimes finally exposed, she provided investigators with crucial intelligence about the Circle's current operations. Williams revealed that the Circle operated through a network of seemingly legitimate businesses and properties scattered across multiple states. The group started attracting controversy in the late 1980s with accusations of deception of recruits, holding cult members against their will, forcing members to donate money, but their sophistication went far beyond typical cult activities. They had infiltrated local businesses, government offices, and even law enforcement agencies to protect their operations from scrutiny. The organization's structure was more complex than investigators had initially understood. Williams described a hierarchy with the voice at the top, followed by regional coordinators who managed specific territories. Each territory contained multiple cells responsible for recruitment, surveillance, and the execution of rituals. The symbol carved into David Morrison's skull served as a completion mark, indicating successful participation in the organization's most sacred ceremonies. Williams provided detailed maps of properties the Circle had used over the years, including abandoned mining facilities, remote compounds, and urban safe houses. Many of these locations had been purchased through shell companies and dummy corporations, making them nearly impossible to trace through conventional means. The Circle had learned from law enforcement techniques and adapted their methods accordingly. Most disturbing was Williams's revelation that the organization continued to actively recruit new members. They targeted vulnerable individuals through online forums, support groups, and spiritual communities. The Circle presented itself as offering meaning and belonging to people searching for purpose in their lives. Only after members became deeply involved did the true nature of the organization reveal itself. The FBI established a joint operations center to coordinate the massive effort required to investigate the Circle's network. The group, which is likely responsible for at least 17 ritualistic murders, consisted of 4 members, had grown into something far more sophisticated. Intelligence analysts worked around the clock to map the organization's structure and identify priority targets for raids. Surveillance operations began on multiple properties simultaneously. The Circle had learned to compartmentalize their activities, ensuring that no single location contained enough evidence to expose the entire network. This meant that law enforcement would need to coordinate simultaneous raids across multiple states to prevent evidence from being destroyed or members from being warned. The psychological evaluation team, led by Dr. Patricia Holmes, developed profiles of likely circle leadership based on the organizational structure Williams had described. Dissatisfaction with society and low degrees of success in life make them identify with the cult and adore the cultists as if they were pop idols. The leadership appeared to be highly intelligent individuals who used sophisticated manipulation techniques to control their followers. Dr. Holmes's analysis revealed that the circle's recruitment methods specifically targeted individuals experiencing major life transitions. College students, recent divorcees, people who had lost jobs or experienced family deaths were particularly vulnerable to the organization's promises of spiritual fulfillment and community. The circle exploited these vulnerabilities with remarkable precision. Electronic surveillance revealed that the circle maintained extensive communications networks using encrypted messaging systems and coded language. They had adapted to modern technology while maintaining their core practices. The organization operated legitimate businesses that provided both financial resources and cover for their criminal activities. Federal prosecutors worked with the task force to develop a comprehensive strategy for charging circle members under RICO statutes. The organization's multi-state operations and complex financial structure made it an ideal candidate for racketeering prosecution. This approach would allow authorities to prosecute members for conspiracy even when individual criminal acts couldn't be directly proven. The investigation revealed that the circle had been responsible for dozens of disappearances over the past 3 decades. Missing persons cases across multiple states showed patterns consistent with the organization's methods. Young people who fit specific profiles had vanished under circumstances that now seemed clearly connected to circle activities. Forensic accountants uncovered a sophisticated financial network that used religious tax exemptions, international banking, and legitimate business operations to fund the circle's activities. The organization had accumulated significant wealth through member donations, life insurance policies, and business profits. This financial sophistication explained how they had been able to operate for so long without detection. The breakthrough that investigators had been waiting for came when surveillance teams identified what appeared to be a major circle compound in rural Montana. Electronic intercepts revealed increased activity at the location, suggesting that leadership was consolidating operations in response to the investigation. This presented law enforcement with both an opportunity and a significant risk. The Montana compound was isolated and heavily defended. Intelligence suggested that circle members were prepared to resist law enforcement action violently. The organization had accumulated weapons and defensive positions, indicating they had long planned for the possibility of discovery. This meant that any raid would need to be carefully planned and overwhelming in scope. Detective Martinez, despite being a local law enforcement officer, had become central to the federal investigation due to his expertise with the case and his understanding of the circle's methods. He worked closely with FBI tactical teams to plan the operation that would hopefully end the circle's reign of terror once and for all. As preparations for the raids intensified, investigators continued to uncover new evidence of the circle's crimes. Additional symbols, matching those found on David Morrison's skull, were discovered in cold cases dating back to the 1970s. The organization had been active far longer than anyone had initially suspected, claiming victims across decades while remaining completely undetected. The families of the five friends from Millfield found themselves at the center of a story that had grown far beyond their personal tragedy. Their children's deaths had exposed a conspiracy that reached into the heart of American society. While this knowledge brought no comfort, it provided them with a sense that their loss might finally lead to justice for countless other families. The symbol carved into David Morrison's skull had become the key that unlocked one of the most extensive criminal conspiracies in American history. What had started as a search for five missing friends had revealed a network of evil that spanned decades and multiple states. The circle of the Eternal Dawn's time in the shadows was finally coming to an end. As the investigation reached its climax, Detective Martinez reflected on the journey that had brought them to this point. The discovery of David's remains had been just the beginning of a much larger and more horrifying truth. The circle's carefully constructed facade was crumbling, but the most dangerous phase of the operation was still ahead. The raids were scheduled to commence at dawn across multiple states simultaneously. Hundreds of law enforcement officers were prepared to move against the circle's network of compounds, safe houses, and business fronts. After decades of operating in darkness, the circle of the Eternal Dawn would finally face the light of justice. The investigation had revealed that evil could hide behind the mask of spirituality and community, but it had also shown that determination and cooperation could expose even the most sophisticated criminal organizations. The symbol that had marked David Morrison's death would soon mark the end of the circle's deadly reign.